Boss battles are an iconic part of the Kingdom Hearts series and often the most memorable part of any given world, and as such, there's a great responsibility to pick appropriate music for each encounter. A properly selected boss track can elevate the scene, whether it's engaging the player by calling back to a previous game, or expanding our understanding of the situation with an unexpected pick. By the same token, jarring or out-of-place tracks can confuse the player and detract from the moment if the context of the battle clashes with the song's established function. The Kingdom Hearts series has a wide array of beloved boss themes, and each one serves a distinct purpose. You might be familiar with Destiny's Force, exclusive to Pure Blood Heartless, Squirming Evil, exclusive to Disney bosses, and Tension Rising, exclusive to Nobodies. Except everything in that sentence was completely false. Those might have been the original purpose of those tracks, but each of those boss themes have been used for fights that diverge wildly from their initial intended use. As music is used and reused, our understanding of the track and what it represents grows and changes. Sometimes, new games will add more depth to a song's meaning or leverage its existing narrative role to say something interesting. Other times, new games will misunderstand a song's purpose and put it in situations that make absolutely no sense, diminishing the scene's impact. Every song in the series has undergone a unique musical journey. By analyzing how they were used throughout 20 years of Kingdom Hearts games, we can understand their functions and maybe find some new connections that are yet unseen. Today, we're going to start this musical journey with the boss themes of Kingdom Hearts. We'll take each of these songs and track every time it was used from its introduction to the modern day, and learn how its narrative function evolved over time. Specifically, we're focusing on multi-use boss themes like Shrouding Dark Cloud and The Encounter, not character-specific songs like Darkness of the Unknown or One-Winged Angel. In this exercise, the multi-use Disney and Heartless boss themes have more intricate stories to tell. That about covers it for housekeeping, so let's get started. The first proper boss theme we ever hear is Destiny's Force, playing for the dark side on the crumbling Destiny Islands. The first appearance of a track is very important to understanding its function. It establishes its role and sets expectations for any future appearances. The dark side was an intimidating monster that destroyed our home, and nothing matches that threat for quite some time. In KH1, Destiny's Force is very effective because after this first use, we don't hear it again until the second half of the game. When it finally reappears, Destiny's Force makes quite the entrance. Depending on the order you clear the worlds, this will be Opposite Armor, Genie Jafar, Ogie's Manor, or Parasite Cage 2. What all of these have in common is that they are second phase, transformed versions of our foe. Therefore, we can say that Destiny's Force represents an increased threat from Disney or Heartless bosses. The late game plays the track for the Hollow Bastion Behemoth, the Darkside rematch at End of the World, and the Phantom, all of which are built up through the story as strong and menacing encounters. This gives Destiny's Force a secondary meaning, strong or important endgame Heartless. At this point in the series, Destiny's Force is not strongly linked to Pure Blood Heartless. It has as many appearances for Disney bosses as it does Darksides. The consistent thread is that these bosses are supposed to represent a heightened threat level. To contrast this, KH1 establishes Shrouding Dark Cloud as the lower-end boss theme. While Destiny's Force takes a hiatus in the early game, Shrouding Dark Cloud scores the fights against Guard Armor, Trickmaster, and Cloud. In the mid-game, it appears for the Pot Centipede, Parasite Cage 1, and Anti-Sora, and in the late game, it is absent entirely. This paints a pretty clear picture. The song is used for weaker Heartless threats. In the early game, when Sora is at his weakest, this manifests as world-end bosses. In the mid-game, when Sora is stronger, we fight the same caliber of enemy as a mid-world boss, showing our character's growth. The only wrinkle is Cloud. While he is of a similar threat as the Heartless that use this theme, he is notably not a Heartless. It could be that the implementation team couldn't resist using Shrouding Dark Cloud for the guy named Cloud, but I think it's just a matter of having no perfect fit and picking a song that's close enough. It doesn't ruin our understanding of the track's function, but it serves as an early example of how weird edge cases can mess up a pattern in a song's use. Since KH1 has such a great volume of Disney bosses, it makes sense for them to have their own theme, so Shimomura gave us Squirming Evil. Unlike the other two songs, Squirming Evil is not limited to just the early game or just the end game. It plays for Cerberus, Clayton and the Stealth Sneak, Human Jafar, Normal-Sized Ursula, Captain Hook, Human Maleficent, Hades and the Hades Cup, and, in the original Japanese release, Chernabog. From this first showing, the best we can say that Squirming Evil is a theme for Disney bosses, typically, but not exclusively, on the weaker end. And that brings us to the Deep End, the fourth and final multi-use boss theme in KH1. It shares some real estate with Destiny's Force, first appearing for second phase Disney bosses, Giant Ursula and Dragon Maleficent. It returns for Rock Titan, Ice Titan, Kurt Zisa, and the first phase of the Ansem battle. The Deep End isn't limited to just Heartless or just Disney bosses, but it's clear that this theme means business. These are some of the toughest fights in the game. If we ever hear the Deep End in future entries, we'll immediately know that we're up against a real threat. In general, KH1 did a strong job of establishing reusable boss themes that inform us about the scale or difficulty of the battle. Soon, we will see how future games will continue or challenge the legacy of these songs, but it's important to understand their original purpose before investigating their future appearances. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories does not reuse any boss themes from the PS2 game. It has a comparatively small number of bosses to begin with, only one per floor instead of several per world, so it handles all of its fights with two new tracks, Struggle Away and The Fight for My Friends. The function of these songs could not be made any clearer. Struggle Away is used for Heartless bosses. In both campaigns, that's Guard Armor, Parasite Cage, Trickmaster, and Darkseid. The Fight for My Friends handles the Disney half, Hades, Oogie Boogie, Genie Jafar, Dragon Maleficent, Captain Hook, and Ursula. What's noteworthy about these tracks is their instrumentation. Like most Castle Oblivion related tracks, this pair uses church organ, tying them to the game and locale. At this point in the timeline, we can't draw any deeper conclusions. For all we know, every game in the series could have its own original music and never reuse anything. But with hindsight, this is very important. The Chain of Memories boss themes are the only ones from this era that have never been reused. The games on either side of it will have their music repurposed for new entries, but what happens in Castle Oblivion stays in Castle Oblivion. This adds an extra layer of depth to the meanings of Struggle Away and The Fight for My Friends. They aren't just generic Heartless and Disney boss themes, they specifically represent the memory recreations of Heartless and Disney bosses. I should also take a moment to discuss Face It. It is primarily a pre-battle cutscene track, playing in the lead up to nearly every fight in Chain of Memories, but it also covers some encounters that fall outside of the scope of our two boss themes. This includes Monstro's Belly Brawl, Cloud in the GBA version, and, in what I'm convinced must be a technical error, Ursula, but only in Reverse Rebirth and only in Recom. In that sense, Face It is pretty unfocused in its implementation, but a game like this needs some general use tracks to pick up the scraps in order to keep the main boss themes undivided. The cleanup work done by Face It allows Struggle Away and The Fight for My Friends to reach their full potential. Once again, Kingdom Hearts 2 opted for an entirely original set of boss themes instead of pulling from previous games. This group is the largest we've seen, 8 tracks, double that of KH1. Kingdom Hearts 2 also has a dramatic increase in forced mob fights, and many times we'll see our boss themes serving double duty for these encounters. First among these is Tension Rising. Its introduction in the Twilight Thorn fight establishes this track as the theme of nobodies, and it sticks in this story for the rest of the game. It's primarily relegated to mob fights against nobodies, 8 in total, but Tension Rising also scores the first Demyx battle and the Smackdown with the Beast. That last one is a bit of an outlier. I guess you could say that nobodies are still involved since you're freeing Beast from Zaldan's influence, but it still seems a bit out of place. That one moment aside, Tension Rising has dug itself a very clear niche in the KH2 soundscape. Dance to the Death is another easy one. It plays for early game Heartless threats. 2 mob fights for Land of Dragons 1, the Thresholder and Shadow Stalker in Beast Castle, the Heartless in Disney Castle, Pete summons Heartless in the Cave of Wonders, and finally the Prison Keeper in Halloween Town. The parallel track for Disney foes is Vim and Vigor. It follows a similar trajectory, playing for Shan Yu, Cerberus, the Timed Pirates fights, and Barbossa. Its only use in a second visit is for Hades, but it's only the fake-out Invincible phase. From this, it appears that Vim and Vigor has a pretty strong Disney association. This is complicated slightly by the Battle of Hollow Bastion, where it plays for the Final Fantasy team-up battles. This doesn't fit in with the established pattern, and since it's only one instance, it's not enough to create a pattern of its own. For now, we'll say Vim and Vigor is for early game Disney bosses, and note that as an outlier. When KH2 nears its second half, the boss themes begin to shift. Vim and Vigor is phased out in favor of the Encounter, which plays for Oogie Boogie, Scar, the real Hades fight, Genie Jafar, and the MCP and Sark. This track also has one strange mob fight, being the nobodies at the old mansion you fight with Mickey. Still, there's a clear intent here. The Encounter belongs to mid to late game Disney bosses. With non-Disney enemies, we see the same trend. The second half of KH2 uses the Corrupted for Hostile Program, Storm Rider, Grim Reaper, Groundshaker, and the Experiment. Notably, all of these enemies have been corrupted in one way or another, making the name surprisingly literal. This gives us one of the strongest associations for a track's debut, strong foes that are somehow corrupted. The late game is also home to Sinister Shadows. Its first use is in the Battle of 1000 Heartless, and with an entrance like that, you would think this track is reserved for intense moments. In actuality, it's a sort of cleanup track that picks up any stragglers that the other boss themes didn't fit. Nobodies in Beast Castle and Land of Dragons, the first Grim Reaper battle, and Phase 1 of Sark. It's hard to nail down a specific purpose, so we'll have to keep an eye on it in future games. Desire for All That Is Lost is in a similar situation. It's a catch-all for boss battles and mob fights that didn't have anything else going on. This includes the Nobodies in the Bailey, the Dark Thorn, the Hydra, Final Pete, the Blizzard and Volcanic Lords, and the Nobodies in the Sandlot. There's at least a consistent through line of danger. All of these encounters are supposed to be a serious threat. The final KH2 track is Rowdy Rumble. I already discussed this in the soft episode 0 of this series, but Rowdy Rumble is used for fights with some kind of gimmick. The Hades escape, the first Pete fight, the mini escort, the Steamboat Pete fight, the pirate ship barrel defense, the hyenas, the Halloween Town brats, and the hyenas again. When we hear Rowdy Rumble, we're not supposed to take our opponent seriously. It's a lighthearted theme for gimmicky battles. It's time to start the true video, 2,000 words into the script. Up until now, every game has created an entirely new set of boss themes for its common foes, so the use of each track is stagnant. Starting with Days in 2008, old boss themes are repurposed for new encounters, which is where the fun part of this project begins. Destiny's Force is a perfect example of a track's purpose being clarified by future games. We have established it as a theme for strong or second phase bosses with a secondary association with particularly potent Heartless. In Days, it is exclusively used for Pureblood Heartless, Darkside, Neo Shadow, Dark Follower, Nova Shadow, and Orcus. All of these are especially strong Heartless, which keeps with the secondary KH1 meaning, but further narrows it to Pureblood Heartless. We're evolving the song's purpose. Destiny's Force also plays in the cutscene where Xigbar confronts Xion in Wonderland, which I would classify as a misstep given its previous use cases. This was actually changed to Apprehension in the 1.5 version, which would seem to show that the music implementation team agrees. Shrouding Dark Cloud is another solid use, appearing for the Veil Lizard and Antlion, both early game Heartless bosses, and the Guard armor, which is a callback to its KH1 debut. Days doesn't expand the scope of Shrouding Dark Cloud, but reinforces its meaning and strengthens the existing associations. The third success of Days' boss themes is Rowdy Rumble. It plays for gimmick Heartless fights like the Deserters and Emerald Serenades, mini-games like the Break the Jars or Prove Your Endurance missions, and the cheeky Xigbar fight in Olympus Coliseum. This lines up perfectly with what we had come to expect from the track, unserious or lighthearted encounters. In contrast, the implementation of Vim and Vigor has nothing in common with its KH2 appearances. Days plays it for the Infernal Engine and Leechgrave, both mid-game Heartless bosses, and the Wave of Heartless in Mission 90 Agrabah. KH2 had set the precedent that Vim and Vigor is used for Disney bosses, so hearing it for Heartless is odd, even when factoring in the FF Ravine fights. But we will have to wait and see whether this is a temporary misstep or a continuing change in the track's purpose. Tension Rising is in a similar spot. Days uses the tracks for a smattering of Heartless fights, typically the target enemies of missions that aren't big enough to be actual bosses. It was only ever used for nobody battles in KH2, so what's the big idea? I've heard some people say that the meaning still applies because it's Roxas who is the nobody, though I think it's more likely that the music implementation team simply grabbed the one boss theme from Roxas' campaign to toss into the Roxas game. Either way, Days evolves the meaning of Tension Rising, adding a secondary use case, Heartless mini-bosses. However, since we already have half a dozen Heartless boss themes and only one nobody boss theme, I view this evolution as an unfortunate development. Days also introduced a multi-use boss theme of its own, Fightin' Away. The similarities in instrumentation and rhythmic patterns have sparked a theory that this was originally an unused Chain of Memories track, though regardless of its origin, Fightin' Away has a pretty clear meaning. It's for Heartless bosses, typically on the stronger end. Crimson Pranksters, Chill Ripper, Ruler of the Sky, Dust Flyer. Not much room for interpretation. Those of you with keen memory might have noticed that I omitted Xion. During her 4-phase boss battle, she cycles through the different boss themes, Shrouding Dark Cloud, Vim and Vigor, Fightin' Away, and finally ending with Vector to the Heavens. This is a great touch, as it ties the music into the narrative threads about Roxas and Xion's memories. It serves as a great example of how using a track for something outside of its usual purview, in this case a Heartless boss theme for someone who's not a Heartless, can give a heightened sense of meaning to the moment. It doesn't change how we understand the track, but rather our understanding of the track changes how we view the moment. The music of Kingdom Hearts Coded is defined by technical limitations. At the start, the original flip phone version had a demo episode where you could play through an abridged Traverse Town. The boss fight against Guard Armor played Shrouding Dark Cloud, which lines up nicely with our notes. Then, the first real episode was released, Destiny Islands. The boss of that stage was Darkside, which used Shrouding Dark Cloud. What about Trickmaster Wonderland? Shrouding Dark Cloud. The Disney bosses? Shrouding Dark Cloud. The original characters? Shrouding Dark Cloud. So yeah, KH Coded doesn't tell us a lot. It looks like they only had space for one boss song, so there's not much intentionality behind the music for each battle. But, intentional or not, Coded has adjusted the journey of Shrouding Dark Cloud. it now has a secondary role as a generic one-size-fits-all boss theme. I sure hope this doesn't have any repercussions in the future. Knock knock, it's the future! Birth by Sleep is here with an interesting suite of boss themes, 2 from KH1, 3 from KH2, and 3 brand new originals. We'll start with the originals. There are 2 themes dedicated solely to Unversed, Unforgettable and The Tumbling. If we look at the distribution of battles in the campaigns, there's no dividing line between early game and late game battles. The only real distinction is that The Tumbling is played for wacky opponents, while Unforgettable is for the more visually threatening Unversed. Factoring in the Mirage Arena, this still holds true. The third BBS original is harder to pin down. Extreme Encounters is only used twice, once for the Cursed Coach and once for Zack 2. What's more, the Mirage Arena refights switch out the music, so there's really nothing unique about these battles that necessitates Extreme Encounters. The 2 opponents have little in common. They are different types of beings, fought at different points in the game in different campaigns. For once, a boss track has absolutely no defining use case in its debut game. As for the reused tracks, I think 2 out of 5 are used very effectively. Vim and Vigor was established as an early to mid-game Disney boss theme in KH2, and though Days borrowed it for Heartless fights, Birth by Sleep clarifies its intended purpose by using it exclusively for Disney characters. In the first Circuit of Worlds, that's the world end boss of Magic Mirror in both campaigns. In the second, that's Experiment 221 and Peter Pan, both relatively unimposing foes. The Mirage Arena plays Vim and Vigor for the Hades and Zack duo battle, and Final Mix uses it for the Ringer Unversed mission in Disneytown, which is baffling but not the most out-of-place thing I can think of. Through its use in Birth by Sleep, Vim and Vigor is re-established as a Disney theme first and foremost, seemingly admitting that the Days usage was a misstep. The more sinister Disney villains use the Encounter for their battles, once again matching KH2 to a T. That's both flavors of Maleficent, Gontu, Captain Hook, and the Mirage Arena Ice Colossus refight. I have to compliment Birth by Sleep on its consistency so far. It's clear that the implementation team made an effort to use appropriate boss tracks for its Disney foes. Except for one, that is. The Ice Colossus and Hades fight in Aqua's campaign, and no other battle in the game, is set to Destiny's Force. Why? They're not pure-blood Heartless, that's for sure. It could be a remnant of the KH1 Disney boss appearances like Genie Jafar, but both Hades and the Ice Titan were in KH1, and neither of them used Destiny's Force. Especially with how the Mirage Arena refight changed the track to the Encounter, Destiny's Force feels like a random or careless pick. It only serves to confuse the meaning of the track. They actually went through the effort of re-recording Destiny's Force in higher quality to fit the PSP audio, so maybe it was originally intended for somewhere else, and after that was changed, they slapped the song onto the Olympus Coliseum fight so it didn't go to waste. Oh hey, let's check back in on Shrouding Dark Cloud. Surely it's used better than Encoded. Oh. The one good use here is the non-possessed Zack, since that's a callback to the Cloud fight from KH1. Even though Shrouding Dark Cloud was a bit of an odd pick at the time, given how connected these 2 characters are in FF7, it's an inspired choice to set the Zack fight to the same song that Cloud would use 10 years later. Less inspired is its use for 2 random Unversed mob fights. That matches nothing we've seen so far. But more pressingly, Shrouding Dark Cloud was turned into the battle theme for worlds that didn't have designated battle tracks. The Mirage Arena, as heard in all non-boss waves, and the Keyblade Graveyard, as heard in multiplayer versus mode. This broad application of Shrouding Dark Cloud erodes the track's original weight and the meaning it once carried. Encoded in Birth by Sleep, it is just a default battle track that signifies nothing in particular. As a player, we can no longer glean any information from hearing this track appear. Birth by Sleep also marks a downturn in the journey of Rowdy Rumble. If you'll recall from KH2 and Days, the track informs the player that the fight is unserious or gimmicky, and a few places in BBS take advantage of this existing context. The Lucifer battle, the Cinderella escort, and the mob fight with Maleficent's goons are all reasonable applications. I cannot say the same for Aqua's escape from Maleficent's castle, an epic sequence that is severely undercut by the jovial battle tune. After that, 8 more mob fights use Rowdy Rumble, making it the most played boss theme across all story visits. Like Shrouding Dark Cloud, Rowdy Rumble is becoming genericized, no longer conveying a specific tone to the player. Moreover, it's becoming homogenized as its use cases are blending together with other general-purpose mob fight themes. The niche it once had is eroding. Remember how the music of the original Coded was defined by what songs they could fit on the hardware? Well, Recoded is the same way. Ever so coincidentally, the 6 multi-use boss themes in Recoded are the exact same ones that were already formatted for the DS in Days. How silly. Unfortunately, it seems like the music implementation team was more concerned with reusing as many Days tracks as they could than picking out appropriate themes for each battle. This means the music of Recoded is going to stress the narrative of some of these tracks. For instance, Fightin' Away. Days used it for its more notorious Heartless bosses, and hey, Recoded has a few Heartless lying around. Surely we could use it for... nope, it's a Disney boss theme now. Specifically, it's a theme for weaker Disney bosses. The stronger Recoded villains, Hades and Dragon Maleficent, use Vim and Vigor, which is indeed an improvement from Days, further solidifying its place as a Disney battle track. In comparison, Fightin' Away makes little sense, picked seemingly because it happened to be available. Since, spoiler alert, this is the last time we'll hear Fightin' Away, its legacy is forever split 50-50 between Heartless and Disney bosses. What a way to go. Hey, at least Rowdy Rumble isn't overplayed. Here it's just used for Pete, which lines up with KH2 fine enough. Tension Rising is also played a single time for Trickmaster. I guess Days used it for Heartless too, but this is what I mean by Recoded going for variety over value. This is finally a perfect opportunity for Shrouding Dark Cloud, but it's switched out for a nobody boss theme. It's not like the Trickmaster lookalikes and Days used Tension Rising, those guys had Fightin' Away, but Recoded already squandered that one on Disney bosses. For some reason. At least the guard armor uses Shrouding Dark Cloud still. If you're gonna keep it in one fight, that one makes sense. What I can compliment Recoded on is its use of Destiny's Force. It plays for the dark side in the first episode, and soars Heartless in the 7th, a great full circle moment that not only mirrors the two KH1 dark side fights to the same tune, but reinforces the Pureblood Heartless association established in Days. Well done. The Birth by Sleep Final Mix Secret episode introduces a new track, Hunter of the Dark, for the Darkhide boss fight. Right now, it's just the theme of that one specific Heartless, so it doesn't fit in with the multi-use boss tracks we've been discussing. But just keep it in the back of your mind, this will become important in another 6 years. Dream Drop Distance is very strange. As far as its original songs go, it has perhaps the most cohesive soundtrack in the series, but its implementation of legacy tracks is spotty at best and jarring at worst. First things first, we'll cover the one new addition to the multi-use boss roster, Untamable. Unlike previous games, nearly every boss in Dream Drop has a unique custom-made track, including Disney and Nightmare bosses. The Stragglers get Untamable as a consolation. This would be the Haku Monkey, the Spellkin-summoned boss rush in Traverse Town 2, and the Holy Moly. Even among the limited Dream Eater cast, these aren't exactly A-listers, so I see why they were given the musical scraps. At least that gives Untamable a pretty clear message. These are Nightmare bosses that aren't important enough to get custom music. Rowdy Rumble plays in Country of the Musketeers for Pete and the Beagle Boys. After 4 games, it's clear that this track has become the de facto Pete boss theme, adding another use case to its increasingly bloated list. Surely it won't get any worse though. The other KH2 track to make a return is The Encounter, and I really like its use here. It plays only in the post-game for the secret Julius battle. Given that it was reserved for strong Disney opponents in the past 2 games, this new appearance affirms the player's expectations. Contrast that to Destiny's Force. It's well established as a pureblood Heartless theme, but even at its weakest point, this track has been reserved for intimidating foes. How about some pandas on trampolines? The music choice here is downright jarring. The narrative function of Destiny's Force, as we have come to understand it, is completely at odds with the Technicolor funhouse on the screen. If there was ever a place for the upbeat and gimmicky Rowdy Rumble, this was it. But no. The silliest battle in the game is set to a song that was introduced to us by a world-destroying nightmare creature. Even worse, this is the only time Destiny's Force appears in Dream Drop. It would have been so easy to just not. But like with Recoded, I think the desire for musical variety clouded the decision-making, leading to this incongruent mess. Shrouding Dark Cloud returns for the Tyrantro Rex chase sequence, and I'm not even surprised at this point. They just throw this track into any battle nowadays. It hurts to see this iconic boss theme deteriorate game after game. Recoded is back. The 2.5 movie version made a few adjustments to boss themes, so we should make a quick note of them before moving on. First, Fightin' Away was removed from all Disney bosses that appeared in the movie. Hades was giving Squirming Evil a callback to his KH1 fight, but an odd pick considering that the song wasn't in the DS game. In addition, the Cloud fight was given Shrouding Dark Cloud, making a pretty consistent FF7 through line across the ages. All of these are good changes that align the implementation more closely with what we have come to expect from these tracks. No one panic, but it's time to cover the mobile game, and the browser one too. It's a bit of a mess, but we can make it easier to digest by splitting it into 3 categories: story bosses, raid bosses, and target battles. Story bosses are the battles that appear along the main quest line, and they use boss music in the same way that any console game would. Let's walk through the fights that reuse one of the tracks we've discussed today. We start with Destiny's Force for the Dark Side, which is a great opener. Genie Jafar also has Destiny's Force, and Cerberus and Hades have Squirming Evil, all direct copies of their KH1 appearances. No notes so far. Rowdy Rumble is, once again, divided in its use. Some of it stays true to its gimmick battle roots, like Cloud in the Colosseum Tournament, the stacked playing cards in Wonderland, and the search for Lucifer the Cat. Other times, the track diverts attention from what should be serious or climactic moments, like the huge snowman, wily bandit, and ferocious Finns, all of which were hyped up as the culmination of mini story arcs. But I'll hold my tongue since we'll see more Rowdy Rumble in just a moment. Other story bosses include the Gaston-inspired Enraged Elk in Beast's Castle, and the Blizzard and Volcanic Lords in Agrabah, both of which use Desire for All That Is Lost. The lores use this track in KH2, as did the other Beast Castle Heartless bosses, so I think these new uses fit well. These are the only times the track plays in Union Cross, so I consider it an effective callback. The same goes for Extreme Encounters in the Mead Maiden fight, which parallels its first ever use for the Cursed Coach in BBS. For the first time since KH1, we also have The Deep End. After over a decade, this song comes back for 3 Heartless bosses and Dragon Maleficent. While I can't say it works super well for the Heartless, its place in the Dragon Maleficent fight is an inspired choice. They could have easily reused the Encounter or Vim and Vigor like Birth by Sleep and Dream Job did for its Disney bosses, but they went for a more underused track that has a much more serious weight to it. The Encounter and Vim and Vigor do still appear in Union Cross though, but for the Shipwreck Shark and Gummy Hound Heartless respectively, and the latter only in cutscenes. That is not a Disney boss, so someone didn't do their homework. That's why we're here to keep track of this stuff. The other strange pick is Shrouding Dark Cloud, changing course yet again to be used for Cobra Jafar. I'm done trying to find meaning in Shrouding Dark Cloud because clearly the implementation team is too. However, if this had just swapped places with the Encounter, then both fights would feel a lot more at home. And that wraps up all of the story bosses up until the release of KH3. Overall, there were several stumbles, but Union Cross makes a solid effort to match bosses with the same themes they had in prior games, and brought back many seldom used tracks like The Deep End, Extreme Encounters, and Desire for All That Is Lost. Since these tracks have had a relatively uncluttered musical journey, their function is crisp and clear, making them highly effective. On the other side of the credit card, we have raid bosses, or in other words, where boss themes go to die. It doesn't matter if you're an early game Heartless theme, an end game Heartless theme, or not a Heartless theme at all, you're getting matched up with a dozen raid bosses. This was the music distribution in the original Kingdom Hearts key. There are a few special tracks that aren't part of our general boss theme list. Spooks of Halloween Town for the limited Halloween event Heartless, Pirate's Jig for the Pirate Heartless, Battleship Bravery for the Gummy Heartless, and Fragments of Sorrow for the Dark Side and its lookalike. These are all great picks, but not relevant to the discussion at hand. As for the lineages that we've been tracking, you should now be able to spot the ones that don't fit. The Encounter is exclusively a Disney boss theme, so the Trident Tail family sticks out like a sore fin. The spiders are also on thin ice with Vim and Vigor. It has been used for Heartless back in days, but that was corrected to Disney bosses in the next 2 games, so now Key is doubling back to a meaning that was already overwritten. On the other hand, Destiny's Force of the Behemoths and Shrouding Dark Cloud for the Guard Armor and Trickmaster are exactly what we would expect. Dance to the Death makes its first appearance since KH2, and being paired with wackier raid bosses fits with its existing association with weaker Heartless. Likewise, The Deep End was made for especially strong foes, so it is a fitting choice for the powerful Omega variants. The Holiday Heartless don't exactly fit the bill, but if you consider them a variant of the Guard Armor Omega and Trickmaster Omega, then I could be convinced. The only true flop outside of the Disney boss themes is the Corrupted. I don't think the Honeybee Heartless is an intimidating foe or a corrupted entity, so the music choice seems kind of random. But I'm not going to harp on the KH Key music choices because Unchained Key decided to throw them all away. In the transition to smartphones, all of the raid boss music was shuffled around, and it was largely a downgrade. The number of boss themes was pared down to 5, discarding the rarer themes like Dance to the Death, the Corrupted, and the one-off event themes. Our new ensemble is thus: The Encounter for the Trident Tail lineage, The Deep End for Omega raid bosses still, but also the crabs, bees, and spiders that had their old themes removed, Destiny's Force for Heartless that are physically large, Shrouding Dark Cloud for Heartless that have some kind of equipment or armor, I guess, and Fragments of Sorrow for Heartless that were born on a Tuesday. As you can tell, there's not much of a rhyme or reason for these groupings outside of the palette swaps, and the Heartless groups have very little to do with the music selection. Some of Shrouding Dark Cloud and some of the Deep End still fit, but that's a vestigial remain of the much more cogent browser version. The good thing is that this is a live service game, so they can release an update to switch the music around and fix everything. And by fix everything, I mean make it even worse. In September 2019, Update 4.3.0 changed around some raid boss music for absolutely no reason. The Behemoth and Darkside switched from Destiny's Force, a perfectly good boss theme that they had used since KH1, to the Deep End. The same happened to the Darkside Omega and Trickmaster. I know people are quick to dismiss the mobile games, but in this one instance, I'm actually going to agree. While the browser version had a clear plan, the mobile version's raid boss themes pay little respect to the musical history of the tracks, largely ignoring the thematic connections built up over the past 7 games. This is a steep contrast to the Union Cross story content, which makes a great effort to bring back old tracks that are contextually relevant, even if just for a single fight. The appearance of boss themes for raid bosses still does contribute to their musical journey, but in the same way that national debt contributes to the economy. If you thought we were done with Union Cross, think again. We haven't discussed the third category of boss music, target battles. These are the final enemy of every quest that isn't one of the story bosses we already discussed. This could be any enemy at all, from a single shadow that you see 20 times a mission, to the guard armor Omega that's usually reserved for a raid boss. Every single one of these target enemies uses the same battle track, Destiny's Force in the original and Rowdy Rumble in the mobile remake. This is a death sentence for both of these tracks. They're not associated with purebloods or emblems, weak enemies or strong ones, group battles or solo threats, they're played for every single quest. On top of bloating their use chart, this sands down any specific purpose these tracks used to have, leaving us with a flat, one-size-fits-all battle theme. The musical fatigue from hearing these songs hundreds, if not thousands of times, means that we're not going to care if the track shows up in a future game, and it's not going to convey any real meaning if it does. Thankfully, English audiences are largely immune to the effect for Destiny's Force. Still, the narrative paths of Destiny's Force and Rowdy Rumble have been irrevocably changed. Even if you don't care about the key series, this can ripple into future console titles. In the 2 hours that it takes to clear Cage 0.2, there's not a lot of time to mess up the musical implementation, and indeed the bosses are all perfect fits for the respective themes. The 2 Darkside fights use Destiny's Force, an attempt to forget about the mobile games and regain its pureblood heartless association. Nature is healing. Meanwhile, the new Demon Tower uses Hunter of the Dark High theme I mentioned earlier. This new use recontextualizes the theme as a Realm of Darkness pureblood boss instead of belonging to one specific entity. And then comes Kingdom Hearts 3. Everything we've learned has led up to this point, but in many cases it seems that our note-taking was more thorough than Square Enix's. Take Squirming Evil, a track that has stuck to its original purpose for a decade and a half. It appears once in Cage 3 for the Lightning Angler. That's not a Disney boss. I don't think I need to explain why it isn't a good thing to use tracks willy-nilly without understanding their existing associations. Same goes for The Encounter, used once for the Rock Troll in Olympus and rearranged for the Metal Troll in San Fran. Even if you're really into the aquatic raid bosses, this placement doesn't match with what we've seen from prior games. Or how about Vim and Vigor? This track has something of a troubled history, and Cage 3 does nothing to clarify its purpose, using it for a mob fight in Thebes, the Raging Vulture, and the Catastrophe Chorus. Between this, Squirming Evil, and The Encounter, the placement of these one-time Disney boss themes feels random, and random is the last thing you want your music to feel. If they wanted to bring back these classic Disney boss themes, then maybe they should have actually put some Disney bosses in their game. But hey, it's not all bad. The Unversed exclusive Unforgettable made its grand return for the Lump of Horror, Hunter of the Dark got some more Demon Tower action, and Rowdy Rumble was actually used for a lighthearted gimmick battle, bless its heart. These moments feel satisfying because it affirms the player's experiences from a lifetime of Kingdom Hearts games, made doubly cool by the new arrangements. I especially like Cage 3's handling of the Deep End. It's the returning theme of the Rock Titan and appears again in the cutscene confrontation with Hades. Then, a fantastic piano reduction plays in the Dark World when Ansem fights Aqua, a callback to the first Ansem fight in End of the World which also played the Deep End. Very effective. Then there's The Corrupted, which highlights both ends of Cage 3 music implementation. Its first appearance is flawless. The Supreme Smasher toys a strong and indeed corrupted opponent. But then Cage 3 stumbles and plays it in the Caribbean for some ship battles with Luxord. You could say that they're going for a parallel with the Grim Reaper from Cage 2, but I don't think that's the case. The Caribbean and San Francisco both reuse a lot of old boss themes and not even new arrangements. This happens once or twice in the rest of the game, but constantly in these two worlds. Maybe it's because they're the last two Disney worlds and development time was running thin, or maybe because they're the two worlds Ishimoto scored and the team was desperately trying to insert some musical variety, but either way, the implementation is noticeably sloppier here. For some more evidence, Sinister Shadows, used for the story sequences in San Francisco and the fight against the Dark Cubes. This doesn't exactly conflict with our understanding of the track, but it's still a bit weird. It also appears in the big battle of a bunch of bad guys, an obvious reference to the track's debut in the Battle of 1000 Heartless. Tension Rising is unique among returners in that it received two new arrangements. One is for Angelic Amber, which is a bit directionless, and the other's for the Reaper Nobodies, which aligns much more closely with what we've come to understand from the track. At this point, it's safe to say that Tension Rising is mostly associated with Nobodies, but still broadly applied for any range of foes. The final returning track is Shrouding Dark Cloud, used for Gigas battles both in and out of the video game world. Though the arrangement slaps, it's still an odd choice. Other than some surface-level visual similarities to the guard armor, the Gigas aren't really associated with what Shrouding Dark Cloud represents. But, factoring in the raid bosses, I'm beginning to become a believer in the idea that Shrouding Dark Cloud is purposely chosen for mechanical-looking enemies. It's not a niche covered by any other track, so I could be onto something here. But then again, Shrouding Dark Cloud is just kind of thrown in random places now and then, so I might be trying to make a connection where there isn't one. Finally, there are 5 new multi-use boss themes that Kingdom Hearts 3 added to the fray. Titanic Clash. Easy, that's for giant-sized Disney bosses. Eye of the Storm. Late-game Disney bosses. No Surrender. Mid-world Disney bosses. Anger Unchained. Heartless bosses, specifically those associated with the darkness in one's heart. And Skyward Striker, the cleanup track for one Heartless boss and half of the battle gates. The only appearance that doesn't fit these strict use cases is Eye of the Storm and the other half of the battle gates. I suspect this was out of a desire for musical variety, since nothing about the context of Eye of the Storm makes it a desirable candidate for unimportant mob fights. Regardless, from this one outing, all 5 pieces have efficiently established a unique role in the KH3 soundtrack. Guess what? Union Cross is back again with the final story updates, which have 3 important moments. 1. Player fights King Candy to Eye of the Storm. This reinforces the KH3 meaning, and the shock of hearing a new boss theme this late into the game's story makes it feel quite climactic. 2. Player fights the Nightmare Sidebug to Titanic Clash. This is a bit weaker, since it's not really in the same weight class as the Titans or Kraken, but is at least kind of a Disney boss. 3. Lauriam fights Maleficent to Squirming Evil. This was her boss theme in KH1, so it works fine, far better than KH3's use of the track. And finally, we reach Dark Road. It has 8 different boss themes, each used for a single purpose, and most of them are direct parallels to earlier games. Cerberus uses Squirming Evil like in KH1. Hades uses the Encounter like in KH2. The Volcanic and Blizzard Lords use Desire for All That Is Lost like in KH2. The Magic Mirror uses Vim and Vigor like in BBS. And while the Earth Gargoyle is new to the cast, it uses Dance to the Death just like the other Beast Castle Heartless in KH2, so it feels right at home. The Fairy Reaper and Furious Reaper use Destiny's Force. They're not pureblood, but they have more direct narrative ties to darkness than your average Heartless boss, so I can reach across the aisle and accept its use here. The final boss, Ringhorn, uses Hunter of the Dark, a natural fit for a being of pure darkness given the track's association with the Dark World. Lastly, in case you thought the song had a shot at redemption, Dark Road uses Rowdy Rumble for the target enemy of every quest, once again reducing its meaning to any battle in which you are battling. Having traversed the timeline from start to end, we must now take a holistic look at the musical journeys we have uncovered. Of the 25 songs we discussed, few of them kept their original meaning throughout the whole series. Sometimes, using the track in new and different scenarios added depth to its purpose, but more often it steered the track towards homogeneity. Destiny's Force changed from a theme for any strong or Phase 2 boss into a song associated strictly with pureblood Heartless, but took a nosedive in Dream Drop in the Key series. However, thanks to just how iconic the dark side is and some restoration work from 0.2, the pureblood association still holds, even if its strength has waned since Days. Shrouding Dark Cloud started as a theme for early game Heartless in KH1 and Days, was used for any and everything encoded in Birth by Sleep, it found a middle ground for armored, mechanical, or equipment-based foes in Union Cross and KH3, while also having a surprisingly consistent side branch with the Final Fantasy VII boys. This confused evolution makes the track an ineffective choice for most future applications. Squirming Evil was made for Disney bosses, usually not in their strongest form, and it stuck its course all the way to Dark Road. The Lightning Angler is the lone blemish on its otherwise perfect record, and is by far the KH1 theme with the most consistent throughline. The Deep End was for strong late-game opponents, which was mostly abided by in Union Cross, and KH3 stuck the landing. It is noticeably underused compared to its KH1 compatriots. Struggle Away and The Fight for My Friends are the only 2 multi-use boss themes from the 2000s that never left their home game, and it is exactly because of that exclusivity that these tracks hold such narrative weight. From their use to their instrumentation, these songs are bound to Castle Oblivion, and it would be very jarring to hear them return in any other context. Tension Rising was originally a theme for nobodies, and while KH3 proves that affiliation still exists, the meaning of the track was made less precise by years of heartless battles. It shows how even a track that had a clear and narrow purpose at its debut can be altered by future entries. Dance to the Death and Desire for All That Is Lost are both shared between mob fights and bosses. The former was common in the early game, and the latter indicated a heightened sense of danger. Neither of them have particularly strong identities, and they saw scarce reuse in subsequent releases. Vim and Vigor was meant to be a Disney boss theme, but over the years spent just as much time on Heartless bosses as it did Disney ones. Both uses persist to the modern day, making this track a weak choice for either. Jack of two trades, master of none. Rowdy Rumble had a turbulent journey. After a few years of scoring low-threat bosses and gimmick encounters, Birth by Sleep treated it as a general-use event theme, after which it formed a peat association and then was overplayed like no other in the mobile games. Whatever identity it once had has been completely dulled by overuse. The Corrupted has an unusually specific function: strong bosses that are literally corrupted in some form or another. When this is played into, it can be leveraged to great effect as seen in Toy Box. When this history is ignored, it falls flat. The encounter lived 2 lifetimes, the first purely for Disney bosses, the second purely for B-list or Heartless. Dark Road seems to return the track to its Disney roots, but the Heartless diversions have left a dent in the track's reputation. Sinister Shadows is the theme of the Battle of 1000 Heartless, as KH3 is eager to remind us. Its use for various mob fights and bosses in the interim of these 2 giant clashes dulls the grandeur of the track somewhat, but it is still a relative rarity. Fightin' Away has 2 completely incongruent uses: a strong Heartless boss theme in Days, and a Disney boss theme in Recoded. Given that it hasn't been heard in 16 years outside of Melmem, it is unlikely the function of this track will ever be clarified by a future appearance. Unforgettable and The Tumbling are the designated unversed boss themes, the former for more menacing threats and the latter for goofier designs. They have not undergone any evolution since their introduction. Extreme Encounters is a bizarre boss theme. Being used for 3 fights in 2 games, it has failed to form any sense of identity. It is, in some sense, a blank slate. Hunter of the Dark is the boss theme for Realm of Darkness natives. After an odd introduction as a Final Mix exclusive, it has seen surprisingly consistent use in the most recent entries, and its function has remained steady. Untamable is for nightmare bosses of less renown. Given that the only nightmare threats outside of Dream Drop use more serious battle themes, it is unlikely that this track will have a chance to develop any further meaning. Titanic Clash, Eye of the Storm, and No Surrender are the new age Disney boss themes, specializing in gigantic enemies, strong late game foes, and less intense mid-world battles respectively. Time will tell if these associations will stick, or if they will follow in the footsteps of Vim and Vigor in the Encounter and develop broader use cases over time. Finally, Anger Unchained and Skyward Striker are the modern Heartless themes. Anger Unchained has a strong link to the darkness inside one's heart, while Skyward Striker has too few uses to cultivate a distinct narrative role. Once again, it is up to future games to understand their purpose and perhaps instill new meaning. And that brings us to the end of our musical exploration. Although there have been many missteps and fumbles across the 20 years of games, the KH Music implementation team has made a commendable effort to reuse old tracks in appropriate situations. Since boss battles are likely to carry more narrative weight and stick in players' memories, boss themes are particularly important to get right, and the bar for future KH games has been set pretty high. Should we see any of the songs we've analyzed today return in Kingdom Hearts 4 or beyond, I hope I've given you the tools to approach these new appearances with a more critical lens. In the future, I plan on taking a look at other subsets of KH music and their respective evolutions throughout the series' history. No group is quite as large as these multi-use boss tracks, but fewer tracks means that each song bears a greater share of cutscenes and thus a heavier narrative load. Until then, may your rumbles be ever rowdy or something. I don't know.